All right, here is chapter 27. Mom reached into the kitchen cabinet and removed a small basket made of twigs. "This is my wild raspberry picking basket," she said proudly, and inspected it to make sure all the twigs were still woven in place. "I made it in this house when my mother ran the Girl Scout meetings in our basement. I got a badge for the best made basket." "Was your mother the judge?" I asked, and looked her in the eye, then looked back at the basket, which looked like it had been woven by a raccoon. "Don't be a wise guy," she reproached me gently. "Now I'm going to go out and hunt for raspberries in the woods up behind Fenton's gas station. I'll be back soon because I'm going to make a raspberry tart for Miss Volker to cheer her up. It's just criminal that she is under house arrest. Can you make a pistol into that tart?" "Can you bake a pistol into that tart?" I asked. She must be going insane down there with that creepy Mr. Spiz as her jailer. Just having to listen to him all day would make me want to take a shot at him. "Don't you worry about Miss Volker," Mom replied as she headed for the back door. "That machine gun she has for a mouth is more than enough to handle Spiz." She went off to the woods, and I sat at the table and slowly paged through the Norvelt news. It was sad that all the Norvelt originals had now died, and there were no more obituaries to write except for Mr. Spiz and Miss Volker. And they might just go on living forever as they promised each other. There wasn't much to read about in the paper. In the chat line section, a pet ferret had gotten stuck in the tailpipe of a car. The owners were asking for tips on how to get it out. Someone suggested that one person hold a butterfly net behind the tailpipe while another person start the car, which would allow the exhaust to blast the ferret out into the net. I'd love to witness that. And then I turned to the back page. As usual, I saved this day in history for last. August 14, 1935, United States Social Security Act was passed, supported by our Mrs. Roosevelt, creating a pension system for the retired. August 14, 1945, Japan surrendered, ending World War II. I didn't get to the third one because at that moment I heard a rifle shot, followed by my mother hollering, "Jack, Jack!" I ran out the back porch. I didn't see her, but yelled it anyway. "It wasn't me. I didn't fire the rifle." "Come quick," she shouted. I couldn't see her though her voice was coming from behind the pony pen. I dashed down the steps and had just cleared the pen when suddenly a small deer crashed out of the underbrush and into our backyard. He'd been shot in the neck, and the blood was running swiftly from that small entry hole and down the golden curve of his fur, where it gathered brightly in the soft thatch of his heaving chest. He must have been dazed by the bullet, because once he ran out into the open, he just stood still. It was as if he wasn't hurt at all and was only figuring out a safe place to hide. But there was too much blood for anything good to happen. From the same path as a deer, my mother came crashing out of the woods. She still clutched the empty basket in her hand as she glanced anxiously back over her shoulder to see what was moving from behind. When she turned her head and saw me, she hollered out in a razor-sharp voice I'd never heard before. "Jack," she ordered, "get the rifle and bring it to me now." I knew she didn't mean my dad's deer rifle because that was locked up in a special cabinet. She meant the Japanese rifle. I stood there frozen for a second until I could just make out a man in the woods wearing a camouflage hunting outfit and a black ski mask. He stepped from behind a white birch tree, and he had a dark rifle held up his shoulder. It was aimed not at Mom, but at the deer. Mom saw it too, and the first thing she did was step into the line of fire between the hunter and the deer, which was still dazed and bleeding out, completely motionless except for steady drops of blood ticking off seconds against the dry summer grass. "Jack!" Mom shouted at me. "Now!" In a blind panic, I ran for the garage. Dad had the regular door locked, so I cut back around to the half door. It was already open, so I ducked down and went inside. I lifted the top of the chest where he kept the war souvenirs. The Japanese flag was balled up and pushed to one side, and the rifle was gone. I dug frantically, through the other souvenirs, but there was no rifle. Oh, goodness, I thought. Don't let that man shoot my mother. I pulled out the long Japanese sword, and when I scrambled back around the corner of the pen, nothing had changed except I was even more afraid. The hunter had moved forward to the edge of the woods, and my mom was still standing in front of the deer. And that was when the deer suddenly dropped down onto his front elbows and bent his head forward, as if death were a pool he could dive into. I looked at Mom, and then at the deer, and back at Mom, and I knew she was one shot away from dropping to her knees. I stood paralyzed with fear and willed myself to raise the sword inch by inch above my head as Mom kept her eyes locked on the hunter's eyes. "Step away from the deer, ma'am," the man demanded. "That's my kill." I ran up to Mom, panting, and handed her the sword, then jumped off to one side, as if leaping from a train. She gripped the sword in her hands and savagely slashed the air back and forth, as if in an instant she could cut that man out of the picture in front of us. "I will use this," she said in a threatening voice, "so just turn around and leave." "The deer is mine," he said in a firm voice, and took a step forward. He must have been 10 feet from her, with that long rifle barrel pointed directly at the deer. Then she took a step forward with her fully extended arm, pointed the tip of the sword right at the center of his masked face. "Turn around and go back where you came from," she said fearlessly, as if bullets would bounce off of her. The deer quietly slumped over onto his side, with his glossy brown eye wide open to the sun and pink foam collecting around his sad, quivering mouth. I dared to slowly walk over to him and knelt down and put my hand on his firm side. He was breathing harder now, and I knew he was dying because there was nothing we could do to help him. "You are now trespassing," my mom said harshly, "and what you have done to this deer is criminal." "Let me get my deer, and you'll never see me again," he replied, and inched toward her. I looked from the deer to the man. "I won't take another step if I were you," she said. And then her face switched from being ready for a fight to a look of disbelief. She tilted her head to one side in a puzzled way and took a measured step toward the man, and then another, as if she were one of the British troops marching eye-high into the barrel of a rifle. She was about 2 feet away from him when she slowly lowered the sword and said, "Will, is that you?" He stepped back and swung his face away from her, then took more steps back into the woods. "It is you," she shouted angrily. "Get over here." He dropped the rifle and ducked down, thrashing his way through the lower branches and summer undergrowth. We listened to the cracking branches in the woods until we couldn't hear him anymore. Then silently we turned and looked at the dead deer. My mother held out the sword. "Take this," she said. I reached for the handle and took it from her. Every move she made was deliberate, as if she already lived this moment a dozen times before and had always done the right thing. She strode forward into the woods, then bent over at the waist and hoisted the rifle off the ground. It was the Japanese rifle. Uncle Will had taken it from the chest. She opened the chamber to check for a round. There was one still in there. She pointed the barrel toward the dirt and fired. It was loud and I flinched. She cocked the rifle and checked the chamber again. Another round had entered and she fired it into the ground. She cocked the rifle again and fired. Click! The clip was empty. "I hate these darn war souvenirs," she said firmly. "They don't care if they kill your enemy or your family." Then she turned and held it out to me. I grabbed it with my right arm, which was stronger. "Now put this back just how your dad keeps it," she ordered. Honestly, if she knew my crazy brother took it out to poach deer, he'd shoot him. "I bet Uncle Will was the one who left a bullet in the gun that night I pulled the trigger," I said. "I know I didn't load it, and Dad said he didn't either." "Well, that may be true," she considered, "but we still can't tell your dad." "But it means that I shouldn't even be grounded," I protested. "It was never my fault." "My crazy brother did not cut down the corn," she quickly reminded me. "That is the bigger reason why you are grounded." Dad made me do that, I cried out to defend myself. And Dad thinks I put the bullet in the gun. It's not fair, and now my whole summer has been ruined. It's not ruined, Mom said. You made a new girlfriend. Who? I asked. I really liked Murdy Joe, but I hadn't told Mom about her. Miss Volker, Mom said, teasing. You go down there all the time and you spend the whole day with her. You might as well be down there kissing her all day for all I know. Oh my gosh, Mom, don't say that, I said. I really don't want to be kissing anybody. Besides, Mr. Spiz wants to marry her. Well, they used to be lovebirds in the old days, Mom remarked. Now he's got her under house arrest. Who knows? Maybe that's what he's been wanting all along. I bet they're arguing all day, I said. You know what they say about love, Mom said sagely. The more you pester someone, the more it means you love them. Is that true, I asked. It's one of the 10 commandments of love, Mom said confidently, so you can count on it. I'm going to put the gun away and the sword, I said, before Dad returns. Hey, she said, look at me. I looked at her face, but not directly into her eyes. Your nose, she said. I ran my hand over it. Why isn't it bleeding? She asked. Well, I was keeping it a secret, I replied, but I'll tell you. Miss Volker operated on it and fixed it, and I helped too. Oh my goodness, Mom said in horror. With her hands? You should have seen the veterinarian tools she used on me, I said wide-eyed. They were like torture tools from the Spanish Inquisition. I've heard enough, she said. Not another word. This day has been too insane already. I nodded. Yep, I said. How are you going to explain the deer to Dad? I'll tell him it just came out of the woods. There have always been poachers back up that way. He can dress it out, and we can use the meat since he's leaving for a while. Then I took a chance. Hey, Mom, can we barter for something like the old-fashioned Norvelt way? What are you getting at? She asked. I walked over and gave her a big hug, then stepped back. Now, how about one in return, I said, and she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. If you say one word about my brother and the gun, you will be grounded until you turn 18, no matter what your father says. Do you hear me? I heard her. Once she walked off, I turned the other way and took a few steps back. I looked directly down at the dead deer, and in its shiny eye, I could see myself reflected. But instead of turning away in fear, I knelt down and placed my hand over the eye. I loved this deer. It never did anything wrong in its entire life except to be in the wrong place. History could be like that, especially for the innocent. I'm sorry, I said, and smoothed his eyelid across his eye and held it there until it stayed. Then I stood up with the rifle and sword and walked away. And that's the end of chapter 27. Now there is just one chapter left. And you know what? I'm just going to post it for you tomorrow. I don't know. Maybe someone's actually going to look at this today and then be kind of excited that you have another video to look at. So, kids, I'm posting it. Look for it. What time is it? 5 o'clock. And this phone takes like an hour to load a 13-minute video onto YouTube. So, be looking for it like around 6 o'clock tonight. Bye.